The envelope arrived on a Thursday afternoon, slipped neatly through the mail slot as if it carried no weight at all. But as soon as I picked it up, I felt it. The kind of heaviness that has nothing to do with paper. The cream-colored cardstock, the raised gold lettering pressed into the front, the faint scent of expensive ink. It was our daughter's wedding invitation. I set it on the kitchen table next to my coffee and called for my husband. We sat together, steam curling from our mugs, and I read the words aloud. Our only child was getting married. We were 55, married more than 3 decades, and proud of what we had built, both in business and at home. Yet in all this time, we had never met the man she was about to marry. Not once. Every attempt we made to meet him was met with an excuse. Urgent business travel, late hours at work, minor illnesses that made socializing impossible. I wanted to believe those reasons. I wanted to think he was simply busy. But the truth lodged in my chest like a small, stubborn stone. He was avoiding us. My husband and I knew that feeling well. We'd started our company in a cramped garage, piecing together secondhand equipment and late nights. We knew the look of someone who had already assigned you a place in their world, and his unspoken verdict was clear. We were beneath his circle. Even so, she was our daughter. Our love outweighed our doubts. When she told us the wedding budget, we transferred half directly to her account without question. It was more than money. It was a statement of faith. We support you. We believe in your happiness. I let myself imagine a day full of joy, family, and the start of something beautiful. The morning of the wedding, I dressed with the quiet excitement of a mother watching a milestone. My gown was navy silk, its beadwork catching the light without demanding attention. My husband wore the charcoal suit I loved best, pressed crisp for the occasion. We arrived hand in hand, ready to welcome the man who would become part of our family. But the moment we saw him, that hope faltered. His handshake was brief, his eyes sliding past ours as if already searching for someone more important to greet. The politeness in his voice was thin, stretched over something cooler. No warmth, no recognition of the role we'd played in making this day possible. When we were shown to our seats, the message deepened. We were placed far from the head table, in a corner that felt more like an afterthought than a place of honor. The tablecloth was the same white linen as the others, but from that vantage point, we were spectators, not participants. Around us were distant acquaintances, people who smiled politely but shared no history with us. From across the room, the head table glittered under the lights, their laughter bright, while our corner hummed with small talk. As the evening unfolded, I noticed the patterns, the way he scanned the room and bypassed our table, how his smile widened for his colleagues, then thinned when aimed in our direction. He moved with ease among the people he valued, clasping hands, sharing quick jokes, leaning in close for photos. Not once did he stop to ask if we were comfortable, if we needed anything. It wasn't the seating that hurt most. It was the message stitched into every choice. You're here because you have to be, not because you're wanted. My husband, ever the diplomat, kept the conversation light at our table. I smiled where I should, laughed when it was expected. But beneath the surface, resentment began to take root. Cold, steady, unhurried. It was not the kind of anger that erupts. It was the kind that waits, watches, and remembers. I reminded myself that the day was for our daughter, yet with every dismissive glance, every polite but distant word, my place in that room seemed to grow smaller. And for the first time, I wondered how long it would be before she, too, would see the man she had married for who he truly was. The music played and people laughed, but from my seat, every sound felt muted, like the speakers were turned down only for our corner. I watched mouths move, hands wave, shoulders lean close. None of that warmth reached us. An invisible line surrounded our table, and he made sure he never crossed it. When he looked our way, his eyes slid over me fast, then moved on. Each pass left a small pinch under my ribs. It was not one mistake. It was a pattern. The first time he came near, it lasted seconds. A quick nod, lips pressed into a thin line, no light in his eyes, no shared happiness. He moved away before I could even say, "Congratulations." Heat crept up my neck. It was the kind of heat you feel when you realize you are not welcome, even though you have done nothing wrong. Minutes later, he greeted another guest. His shoulders dropped, his face opened, and he laughed with easy joy. He clapped the man on the back, leaned in, and spoke at length. I noticed that the sound of his laugh did not travel to us. I tried again later. I stood, took one step toward him, and started a polite question about the menu. He made eye contact for a second, then looked past me. Without a word, he reached for another guest's hand and stepped away. My sentence broke in half. I sat back down. My palms felt damp against the napkin. It was a small thing on paper. In real time, it felt like a door closing in my face. When he did speak to us, his words were short. "Yes. Thank you. Busy night." He did not ask a single question back. He did not follow up on anything we said. He scanned the room the whole time, as if our words were a pause between more important moments. His eye contact was timed. 3 seconds. Look away. 2 seconds. Look away. The rhythm told me exactly how much we mattered to him. I watched the way he walked with our daughter. His hand rested at the middle of her back. From a distance, it looked caring, but his path always curved away from us. Each time she turned toward our table, he bent to her ear and spoke. She would nod and follow where he led. Twice she met my eyes and smiled. Both times the smile faded when she looked back at him. I felt a small drop in my stomach, the way you feel in an elevator when it stops too fast. The small actions kept coming. He offered a refill to the table beside us and skipped ours. He told long, warm stories when he introduced his friends. How they met, funny moments at work, shared trips. When he introduced us, he said only our names. He laughed loudly with his circle and lowered his voice with us. In a group, he angled his body so I stood at the edge, not inside the circle. If I tried to step in, he shifted again, closing the gap with his shoulder. A server came by with appetizers. The tray dipped toward the people around us. When I reached, the server pulled back because he was waving her on. I took my hand back and fixed my smile. My husband squeezed my fingers under the table. His jaw was tight, but he kept his voice even. "We're fine," he said. We both knew we were not. I looked at the place cards and saw the proof in the seating. We were near a pillar with a limited view of the head table. A speaker blocked part of the dance floor. A small draft came from the side door, and the tablecloth lifted now and then against my knees. I reminded myself that details should not matter on a happy day. But these details were not random. They told a story about value and where ours ranked. The photographer gathered groups for photos. He called out names. He said, "Family of the groom," and "close friends." When it was time for us, the photographer hesitated and looked to the groom for guidance. The groom pointed to our corner, then checked his watch. We were added at the end. 2 quick shots, no time for retakes. As we stepped away, I heard him say, "We need to keep the schedule tight." The words were neutral. The tone was not. During the toasts, he stood with his friends near the stage. A friend spoke at length about their bond. Another talked about his leadership at work. People clapped. He looked proud. When our daughter thanked us for the support we had given, she was sweet and sincere. He nodded, but his face stayed flat. He did not look our way. He did not clap a second longer. It was a small thing, but I felt it like a light tap on a bruise. I could not stop old memories from rising. I saw my husband and me at a folding table in our first office, eating takeout while we filled out invoices by hand. I saw myself sewing curtains for our daughter's room when she was 7 because she wanted stars, not flowers. I saw my husband standing in the rain to watch her soccer game while I held a towel and a thermos, ready for the ride home. I remembered paying her tuition in full so she would not carry debt. I remembered hauling boxes up 3 flights to set up her first apartment. I remembered taking late calls when she felt uncertain at work. We gave those years freely. We did not keep score. I did not expect a medal. I did expect basic respect. Back in the hall, I tried to join a conversation near the bar. He was there with 3 men from his company. I stood at the edge and waited for a pause. He glanced at me, then turned his shoulder and said, "Let me finish this thought first." He finished it, then started another. I stood there for a full minute, holding my small clutch, feeling like I had stepped into the wrong room. A woman from our table touched my arm and said, "Come back and sit. It's warm over there." Her voice was kind. The kindness made my throat tight. When the first dance started, I watched our daughter cross the floor. She looked beautiful and happy. I focused on her face and tried to let the joy wash over me. But even then, he guided her back to a group that was not ours. He kissed her cheek. He shook hands with a row of people behind him. He did not glance at our table. A relative of his came to us with a polite smile. "Welcome," she said. "It's a big night." I thanked her. She asked about our trip and our hotel. I answered. She looked past me after each short reply, as if there might be someone else to greet. Her friendliness was thin, like paper that tears if you pull on it. I did not blame her. I could see where she learned it. At one point, he arrived at our table with a tray, set down 2 waters, and said, "Hope you're comfortable." His tone made it sound like a checked box. He did not wait for an answer. He was gone before I could say thank you. The water was lukewarm. I drank it anyway because my mouth felt dry. I noticed more tiny cues. When he listened to his friends, he nodded and repeated their words back, the way people do when they care. With us, he did not mirror a single phrase. With his team, he kept his feet planted and his body open. With us, his toes pointed toward the exit, his body angled as if halfway gone. He stood too close to others and too far from us. He gave long hugs to friends and quick, light touches to us, like he was tapping a surface to test it. I went to the powder room to breathe. In the mirror, my face looked calm, but I could see the small signs: a tight mouth, a faint crease between my brows. Another guest adjusted her necklace and said, "Beautiful event." I agreed. My voice sounded steady. Inside, my chest felt heavy, the way it does when you are holding your breath without knowing it. On the way back, I passed a table where he was telling a story about a business trip. People leaned in. He used names and dates and details. He used his hands. He laughed at the end and touched his friend's elbow. When he saw me near the aisle, he paused only long enough to give me that same thin nod. Then he returned to the story. It was clear who the audience was and who it was not. My husband and I spoke quietly. He said, "Let's keep our focus on her." I said, "I am trying." He squeezed my hand again. We have been partners a long time. We know how to read each other without a lot of words. He was hurt too, but he kept his calm so I could keep mine. The bouquet toss happened, then more dancing. When group photos were called again, the photographer waved a large circle forward. We stood, thinking we were included. The photographer's eyes went to the groom. The groom lifted a hand and said, "We'll do parents later." We stopped. We stepped back. 2 minutes later, the photographer was pulled to another task, and later did not happen. The moment was small. The feeling was not. A little after that, he brought our daughter past our table. For a second, I thought he would stop. He did not. He said, "We're on a tight schedule," and kept moving. She looked back with an apologetic smile. I smiled back. I did not want her to see my hurt. I did not want to add weight to her day, but the smile felt like a mask I could not take off. As dessert was served, a friend of his stood near our chairs and talked about future plans with him. He used phrases like "your circle" and "our tier" and "next level." The words were nothing I had not heard before in other rooms, but hearing them here, within reach of our plates and our quiet corner, made my stomach twist. The friend looked at us once and said, "Pleasure to meet you." He did not wait for our names. He turned back before we could answer. I remembered other rooms. I remembered the year we made payroll by delaying our own pay. I remembered the first big client who took a chance on us and how we wrote a thank you note by hand. I remembered our daughter's first day at her job, the way she stood in our kitchen wearing a new blazer, nervous and bright, and how we told her, "You have everything you need." Those scenes were clear in my mind as I sat in that chair, feeling the distance widen. Toward the end of the night, he finally asked, "Everything good over here?" The words were right. The tone was flat. I said, "Yes, thank you." He nodded once and turned. The question felt like a line he knew he had to deliver, not a thing he wanted to know. By then, my resentment had a shape. It was built from many small pieces: the skipped glances, the cut-off sentences, the managed smiles, the careful steering, the seating, the photos, the tone in the toasts, the way he saved his best self for everyone but us. None of these alone would mean much. Together, they were clear. We were present because it looked proper, not because we were wanted. I stayed polite. I kept my voice soft. I did not create a scene. But inside, the feeling settled into something steady. It was not loud anger. It was a calm refusal to ignore what I had seen. I could name every moment and how it felt in my body: the tight jaw, the dry mouth, the small flinch when he turned away mid-sentence, the heavy chest when our daughter was guided past us again, the prickle in my palms when the photographer looked for permission to include us. I did not make any of it up. I watched it. I felt it. I remember it. By the second hour and beyond, the list of small dismissals was longer than I cared to count. Some of them were so subtle they could pass as nothing in a different light. Put together, they told the truth. We were there to fill a space on a seating chart. We were not included in the heart of the night. I smiled for the camera when it turned our way. I thanked the servers. I hugged the relatives who did make time for us. But inside, the weight stayed. It was no longer a passing sting. It was a settled understanding. In his eyes, we would not be true family. And knowing that, I placed my hands flat on the table, grounded myself, and decided that I would remember every detail, not to hold a grudge, but to stop lying to myself about what I had seen. It didn't happen with a bang. No dramatic music, no raised voices. It was a shift so subtle that at first, I almost missed it. Halfway through the evening, I noticed movement near the far entrance. A man in a dark, well-tailored suit had just arrived. Even from across the room, I could see our son-in-law's posture change. His back straightened, his chest expanded, and that polished smile finally appeared. The smile he had withheld from us all evening. He started toward the entrance with the eager stride of someone about to greet royalty. At first, I didn't recognize the man. The crowd moved. Lights from the chandeliers glinted off his glasses, and then recognition struck. It was the general director of our company, the one who had signed off on our biggest projects, congratulated us after record-breaking quarters, and stood with us when we pushed through setbacks. This was someone who had seen the sweat and the risk that built our success. Our son-in-law slowed his pace just as the general director's eyes swept the room and landed directly on us. The man's face broke into a broad, genuine smile. Without hesitation, he bypassed the groom entirely and came straight to our table. "It's been far too long," he said, shaking my hand with a firmness that spoke of familiarity and respect. He leaned down to greet my husband with equal warmth. "How have you been?" His voice carried none of the hollow politeness I'd endured all night, only sincerity. I could sense our son-in-law standing just behind him, hovering like someone waiting to step into a conversation, unsure of where to insert himself. The truth was, he wasn't needed here. And then a memory flickered. Me in the doorway of our first cramped office, rain soaking my coat, wondering if we'd survive another month. In those days, I felt unseen, just a small figure fighting to be noticed. Tonight, I stood in the same world as someone who had once seen me at my smallest and now acknowledged me at my strongest, right in front of the man who had spent the evening trying to sideline us. "We're doing well," I said, my tone calm, though a quiet, electric satisfaction was building inside me. "Still keeping busy." "Busy? You've built half the infrastructure in this town," the director laughed, "and you still make it look easy." My husband's laugh joined his, the first genuine one I'd heard from him all night. I watched our son-in-law's face closely, the small crease between his brows, the too-fast recovery smile, and finally, the searching glance toward me that seemed to say, "What else don't I know?" "I didn't realize you knew each other," he said, voice a notch too high. "Oh, we go back years," the director replied smoothly. "One of the finest teams I've had the pleasure to work with." That single sentence landed like a stone in still water, visible ripples through every guest within earshot. I could have used the moment to remind him of the wedding expenses we'd covered, or to point out the irony of his earlier coldness. But I stayed silent, not out of fear, out of choice. For my daughter. "I had no idea," he said slowly, forcing a light laugh. "That's all right," I replied, locking eyes with him long enough to be sure he caught my meaning. "We don't talk about everything." The director lingered, asking about new projects, even sharing an inside joke that made my husband genuinely smile. I could feel nearby glances shift toward our table, the air around us subtly charged. For the first time that night, the groom was not leading a conversation, he was trailing it. When the director excused himself, the dynamic remained altered. Our son-in-law slid into the empty chair beside me, his tone suddenly warm, his smile almost too eager. He asked about our travel, the hotel, the food, questions tumbling over each other like stones in a stream. It was the sound of someone trying to mend what they had carelessly torn. I kept my answers polite, but short. Inside, I kept replaying that image, the director striding past him without pause. That fleeting crack in his expression told me more than words ever could. For all his careful posture and pride, he had finally understood something simple. Control isn't about where you seat someone or how little attention you give them. True control comes from the respect you've earned. And I intended to let that understanding sit with him quietly for the rest of the night. By the time dessert was served, I had decided. The events of the evening had been enough to cement my next steps. My son-in-law's sudden change in tone after the general director's visit wasn't lost on me. I saw every extra smile, every polite question for what it was, an attempt to recover the image he had shattered earlier, and I let him think he was making progress. The resentment I'd been carrying didn't flare in loud bursts. It sat low and steady, feeding a new clarity. Every word he spoke now was measured, a performance of respect that hadn't been there before. "We're so glad you could make it," he said at one point, leaning forward as though his sincerity might reach me through posture alone. I answered with a smile that never touched my eyes, and I saw the faint twitch at the corner of his mouth. As the evening stretched, cracks began to form in his polished act. When I answered his questions with short phrases, his jaw tightened. When I let silences hang between us, he shifted in his chair, glancing toward his friends for support. One of them, a man in a silver tie, drifted over, his tone too light, his smile too sharp. "Everything all right over here?" he asked, eyes flicking between us, probing for an explanation. I caught my son-in-law leaning toward him, lowering his voice. "She's distant tonight," he muttered, assuming I couldn't hear. His friend smirked knowingly and gave me a quick, assessing glance, the kind people give when they're trying to slot you into a hierarchy they thought they understood. I didn't look away. When the seating shifted for dancing, he made a point to walk us to the edge of the floor. "I hope you're enjoying yourselves," he said. The same man who hours earlier had barely acknowledged us now needed reassurance. I gave him the kind of answer that sounded pleasant enough to outsiders, but carried no warmth beneath it. The flicker of irritation crossed his face before he smoothed it over, scanning the room to see if anyone had noticed. The tension between us drew in others. His cousin, a sharp-eyed young woman, approached with a forced laugh. "You two seem serious over here," she said, trying to lighten the mood. My son-in-law shot her a quick, almost pleading look. She attempted to draw me into harmless conversation, but my polite, measured responses only seemed to magnify his unease. Then came the not-so-subtle whispers. At one point, his aunt passed by, leaning close to him. "You need to fix this," she murmured, not realizing I was within earshot. He stiffened, nodded quickly, and turned back to me with an overbright smile. Later, as the evening wound down, he offered to help us with our coats. "It's the least I can do," he said, his voice tight. I could tell he was searching for a sign that he'd repaired the damage. Instead, I met his gaze, steady, calm, unreadable, thanked him, and walked away. Behind me, I heard the faint exhale of frustration and his friend's quiet comment, "That didn't go the way you planned." The car ride home was quiet until my husband asked, "Are you all right?" "I'm fine," I said. And I was, because I knew exactly where we stood and exactly what needed to be done. The real shift wasn't in his behavior, it was in mine. I had no intention of announcing my plans, no dramatic scenes. Just quiet, deliberate steps, each one removing a piece of influence from his reach until there was nothing left for him to assume he controlled. But the most unexpected thing happened a week later. The message came early on a Tuesday, short and deliberate. "We need to talk." My son-in-law had never called me directly before, and the abrupt shift was enough to make me pause. It wasn't fear that quickened my pulse. It was curiosity about what had finally cracked his veneer. This time, my husband came with me. We walked into the quiet cafe together, taking seats across from him. He looked nothing like the polished man at the wedding. His smile was tight and unsteady, his eyes darting as though searching for an escape route. "I heard you've been reviewing some paperwork," he began carefully, almost whispering. I met his gaze and replied evenly, "Yes, we've been making a few updates." His composure cracked almost immediately. He leaned forward, desperation replacing the careful posture. "Please, don't fire me," he said, glancing between the two of us. "I know things haven't been perfect, but losing this position would ruin me. It would ruin us." His voice trembled slightly. His hands were clasped so tightly that his knuckles had gone white. My husband stayed silent, watching him closely without offering reassurance, his expression calm but unreadable. We let the moment draw out, each second thick with tension. Finally, I said, "We'll think about it." My husband gave a slow, deliberate nod beside me. It wasn't a promise. It was a measured delay. Even before we left the cafe, my phone began to buzz. A message from his cousin appeared. "Please, whatever's going on, don't make it worse." Minutes later, another from his aunt. "We can fix this as a family." By the time we reached the car, there were more than a dozen unread messages. Some pleaded with us, some leaned on guilt, and a few hinted at consequences. The sheer volume made one truth obvious. They weren't concerned for us. They were circling to protect him. Over the next few days, the messages kept coming. His brother wrote, "He's under a lot of stress. Give him another chance." A family friend said, "You're the bigger people. Don't let this destroy everything." Several messages echoed the same words, as if the family had coordinated their approach. Each one reinforced how quickly they could mobilize when their comfort was at stake. Through it all, my husband and I worked methodically. We met with our lawyer, sitting side by side as we reviewed every clause of every document. We revised terms, shifted control, and locked down access to the parts of our work and finances that truly mattered. Each signature felt like reclaiming ground we had been pushed off for years. Midweek, he called again, his voice tight but trying for calm. "Have you decided?" "We're still thinking," I answered, meeting my husband's eyes as he gave a small nod. And we were. Thinking about that meeting, about the way he had looked when his confidence slipped away, realizing the authority he'd wielded so freely had always been borrowed. The calls and messages from his relatives didn't slow. If anything, they became more urgent. "This will divide the family forever," one warned. "You're making a mistake you'll regret," another insisted. But the harder they pushed, the clearer our decision became. On Saturday night, my husband and I sat together in the kitchen, the soft yellow glow of the counter lamp lighting our mugs of tea. His hand rested over mine as we spoke quietly, remembering the wedding night, every cold glance, every subtle slight. The hurt we had felt then was gone. What replaced it was stronger, the certainty that we had taken back what was ours. If you've ever felt like you don't belong, you're not alone. And you don't have to explain your worth to anyone who refuses to see it.